a post-processing demonstration using Topaz Studio. Now I have Topaz listed in my menu bar along with things like Photoshop and Photos for Mac and iMovie. And so all I have to do to bring it up is to double click it. And it opens with a fairly large screen. The first time you do this, it actually takes a while to get things going, but I've used it a whole lot of times, so it opens quite quickly. I also have prepared a group of files and I've put it on my desktop, and it just makes it easier for me to demonstrate the various techniques. So I'm going to just open up this little file and I'm going to select the picture that I want to work on, and then all I have to do is drag it into the middle here, and you'll see the image open up in just a second. And in the meantime, I'm going to close down that file. I'm going to use that later to store the image. Now there's a whole bunch of things on the left panel, and while it's a big part of Topaz, you really do not need to use those, and they're not free. The free part, so I'm going to get rid of them just by closing that, just so I can make the point that you don't need to do this. You have to pay for it. You just use the free adjustments. The free adjustments are grouped down here. Crop tool, a healing brush, lens corrections, you can do some masking, and there are actually some more things here like rotating the image size. And then there's the adjustment panel over here. Above it you have a nice histogram which shows you the different values that the picture has. The free adjustments that come above the line. So there's basic adjustment, blur, brightness, contrast, color overlay, dual tone, film grain, posterized text, tone curves, and vignettes. We're going to concentrate on using the basic adjustments, the tone curve, vignettes, and we're going to do a little bit with the brightness, contrast. So, but even before I pick a basic adjustment, I'm going to sort of look at the overall picture, and I'm going to say, well, what do I want to do? Well, the first thing I say is the picture's a little flat. It's got some problems with perspective. I took this picture and with the camera sort of pointing up a little bit, and so you get that sense of the building falling backwards. And I want to correct that. Doesn't have much contrast, and really what I'm really interested in is I like the interplay between the poster in the doorway and the figure, because they're sort of looking in the same directions. And I see some problems in the picture. We see these sort of bright reflections that don't they draw the eye away, so I want to get rid of them. And also there's parts here of the picture that I don't really need. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the lens correction, and I choose to do the lens correction first before the cropping, because sometimes with the lens correction you're going to actually have to narrow the picture just because the way the program corrects the lens. So I just click on that, and over here, it actually reads the file and says that it recognizes that this is an Olympus 12 to 40 lens, and it makes some automatic adjustments, but I don't think the automatic adjustments did enough, so I'm going to turn those off. And it brings up a series of sliders that I can use to correct it. Now, just look at this again. You can see how much the automatic adjustments made. So I'm going to turn it off again. You can see that it gets some barrel distortion, but it doesn't really fix the tilt. So I'm going to first thing fix the tilt. And as you can see, this blue line come across, and that's changing. That's telling you the program's working. Now I've almost got it to the point where I say, all right, that's pretty good. I'm going to leave that there. The numbers over here don't really mean anything. You're really doing it by how it looks. And now I'm going to get rid of that barrel distortion, and you'll see if you watch the windows in particular will sort of shrink back into a proper. It's not going to be perfect because every time you take a picture, when your lens is off axis, you're going to have some distortion, but that's better than it was before. The rotation will also help a little bit with this, but you got to be careful with its use. You want to do these things sort of slowly so that you let the program time to work. So I say that's pretty good, and I'm going to say done. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I like to do some cropping. And the reason I do the cropping now is I don't want to deal with editing parts of the picture that I'm really not going to keep. So I'm going to make a decision. Now you can do specific ratios. Like if you wanted to make a 1-to-1, you could just do that, and then you sort of can move this. And actually, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, that's pretty good because I want to keep these things in, and I want this. I also think that this is sort of almost at the PowerPoint. You see you've got the rule of thirds lines there, and that's pretty good. I also see this awning here, and it's a little bit sort of off center. So if I just go to the outside and I can sort of move it, and I watch the guideline, and I want to see that the left and the right sides sort of work together. Now, here's the problem with this, is that I really would like to keep the both sides of the awning in there, but at 1-to-1 I'm just not going to be able to do it. So I'm going to have to go back to unconstrained. So I'm just going to make it just a little bit bigger and then turn it so that I got the right angle on this. And that looks all right. I'm going to move this in a little bit. Okay, and that looks pretty good. And so I'm going to say done. And you'll see the picture snaps into, I got rid of that distracting window. If I had the whole window in, I would have kept it, but this sort of nicely frames the picture. Okay, so now we're going to start working on the picture itself with the corrections for the contrast, the tonality, the amount of saturation. So first thing we'll do is I'm going to bring up the basic saturation. And you can see here there's a whole series of sliders: exposure, clarity, shadow, highlight, black level, white level, saturation, temperature, and tint. I don't really see anything wrong with the overall color balance here, so I'm not going to bother changing the saturation, but I do want to make sure that I've got a good black and a good white. So this has a nice eyedropper, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to say, well, the black ought to be the awning, and you can see there's a shift in the curve here, and I'm also going to take the white and I'm going to say, well, okay, the white of the awning should be the top. Now that probably moved it too far, because you can see we're getting some, on the histogram, there's a bit of peaking there. So I'm going to first try decreasing the highlights, and that helps. And you can see I've got the tip of the histogram right at the edge, and so now I've got a full range of tones here. So okay, that's good for my first basic adjustment, but I still want to do some increase the contrast here a bit, because it's kind of flat at this point. So right now I'm going to collapse that layer, and I'm going to add a tone curve. Now the tone curve represents, this is the highlights, mid-tones. In this area is the shadows. And the traditional increase in contrast, and they'll give you some defaults here, the presets. You can decrease the contrast. Well, that didn't help. You can increase the blue. You can increase the contrast, and that's sort of getting to where I was wanting. Increase the green. No, that wasn't. Increase the red. No. Increase the contrast, though, is a good way to start. Okay, and I kind of like that. It gives me some increased contrast in the midtones, and you can see that now. To turn this off and on, this little I button here, you can see what it looks like. So that's nothing there, and now it is. Okay. Now, I might want to change this a little bit more. I might make more contrast, so I can raise that up and lower that down. And quite frankly, I kind of like that, and I'll show you why I'm going to do it that way in just a second. It looks to me like this is okay. I want to keep some increased contrast, but I want to make sure I have detail in the highlights and detail in the shadows. And you can see here that I've lost some of the detail underneath the awning. Let me show you that. I'm going to turn it off, and you can see I've lost that. Turn it on. Okay, but this is really the best thing about Topaz Studio, because you can select where this adjustment is going to be affected. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on the mask, add mask, and you'll see this white panel come up. Now the key in masking is white reveals and black conceals. So I'm going to take a brush, load it with black paint, and I'm going to just paint in a black area over here. And you can see it comes up black, and all of a sudden I have my detail in the shadows. I'm going to do a little bit here and a little bit here. Okay, and so I've maintained my shadows in that area. Now if I wanted to, okay, I can always say, well, here's my little eye. Let's take it off, put it back on. Looks good to me. All right. Now, I'm going to close this one up because I'm still, remember, had a problem with this bright white area here. And so I've got to do something for the highlights, and I'm basically going to do the same thing again. I'm going to create another tone curve, and I'm going to pull the highlights down. I'm going to grab that, and you can see how much I can do that. Now, overall, it looks way too underexposed. You know, you're getting to that point where you say, well, this doesn't look right. But I'm looking in this area here to make sure I got detail. I'm looking in this area here, so I've dropped those highlights. And now I'm going to add a mask. But this time, the easier way to do the mask is to invert the mask, make it all black, okay? Take my paintbrush, get some white paint now, and I'm going to make this a little smaller to start with. And I'm just going to paint in right over here, and you can see how I have been able to very carefully drop that area down. Now I actually may want to change the brush a bit, take it down here, make it really kind of soft, and just, well, that's too much. So I'm going to say that was bad. So I can undo this. There is a button up here that will just take that away. All right. And you got to go back, do the white, get your white brush. Oops. You can always do Command Z to get rid of a thing. I made that too. Still did it wrong. The radius is just too big to start with over here. Okay, that's better. Now, there's also a way of decreasing the effect of the brush. Okay, and you really want to. You can click on the adjustment layer here, or the adjustment brush, to adjust the mask. And you can see here you can either expand the mask, make it a little bit bigger. You can increase the contrast so that it changes the way the mask is working. You know, if you lighten the mask, some of that white low contrast is going to seep through, and so that looks pretty good. And then there's a density. You can change it this way also. So using these different tools, you see what I'm doing is making sure that in this area here we have detail in the highlights, and that excessive highlight has been knocked down. Okay, so we've gone over two different kind of masks now. Here's a white mask and a black mask, and this is a really powerful tool to control the way your picture appears. Now I'm going to add one more. I'm going to use another black mask in a second. I'm going to go to Adjustments. I'm going to put another basic adjustment layer here, and you say, well, why didn't you just go back to the top layer and put the adjustment there? And I'll show you in a second why I didn't do that. Now I'm going to pump up the clarity quite a bit here. Okay, and that creates all this mid-tone separation. Okay, and I'm really liking it in his pants, his shoes, you know, this area. Actually, I don't mind it over here. You know, it gets that sort of grunge look. But I'm also going to put a mask on this, and that is another black mask. Take my brush, load it with white paint, and all I'm going to do is brush it into here, so we let that adjustment come through. All right, just to let you see before. This is with the adjustment, without the adjustment. Okay. All right. Now, I think I also like the idea of letting some of that come through over there on the stonework. And to do that, I'm going to take my brush, make sure I got the white paint there. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it pretty soft. And I'm just going to, you know, you see, you just get a little bit more. I'm going to put a little here. Okay, it just adds a little detail into this otherwise bland area. All right, so I'm okay with that at this point. So what else are we going to do with this? I'm going to add one more adjustment, and that's the vignette. I like vignettes because it sort of pulls the eye in, and you can increase the strength to where you want it. You could also change the actual vignette. Normally it's black, but sometimes you might want to, you know, brown or some other color. You can change the center of the vignette by moving it like that. Most times you want it in the center. All right. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 adjustments, plus the lens correction, plus the crop to create this image. Now, just to show you what it was beforehand, there's actually a button up here. I can just push, and there's the original, and here it is now. I think you'd have to say this is a much better image. All right, and what you end up, always important to do, save your work. So I can save this, and it will save it as a TIFF. I like saving it as a TIFF file. You can save it as a JPEG or a PNG. This TSP file is specific to, it's a Topaz Studio file format. I don't find it very useful, but TIFFs are very useful because you can bring it into any program. Make sure that you name it something different than what the original was, so that you keep your original. So I usually just put a suffix of 2 or something like that. Some people use, they'll say, they might call it Ilfernio or Topaz Test Shot or whatever you want to do. 16 bits, no compression. I don't use ProPhoto. Some people do. I find that it's just not necessary. It doesn't work with any of the other printers. So anyway, then I say OK, and it processes it. So that's our first post-processing in Topaz Studio.